Hello and welcome to another episode of Covera Insights, where we talk to industry experts about your personal finance and investment management. Today we have a very special guest. Susmit Patodia is Associate Director and Portfolio Manager at Motilal Oswal. He has over 15 years of experience in the equity markets. He completed his MBA from IIM Bangalore, just like our co-founder Neil. He is an avid cricket fan and poker enthusiast. Invests and plays poker on the stock market both at the same time. Right.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Welcome to the show, Susmit. Let's start with what's going on. I think we had we asked this question because I think perspectives matter a lot. Like last March was a massive drawdown, but then the rally that ensued was even steeper, right? So how do you think about returns? Right? People talk about back to normal. People talk about the new normal. What's your framework? What's your mental model when you think about what's going to happen in the next few years?
Yeah, I think the first aspect of this, Gaurav, is one thing that is getting very clear is we are not returning to normal. We are returning to a better world, right? And I think it's very important to appreciate that and understand that. Right? I mean, just look at the reforms that the government has undertaken over the last 6-9 months. Look at our own selves. I mean, our productivity, our efficiency, our flexibility has gone up so much. So I sometimes think that it will be unfair to ourselves, to our endeavors that we've done over the last few months to say we're just going to return to normal. Right? I think we're all returning to a much better to a much better country, India, to a much more reformed, and I think it is a return to better, not return to normal. That's one overall aspect of the return that is important to understand and appreciate. Coming to returns, the beauty of markets, and I've always said this, that the return in markets is never a straight line, right? It's never linear. I always compare it to trying to get ketchup out of a bottle of ketchup, right? You can keep squeezing, and it never comes out linearly like the way you want it. You typically end up having a lot more of it or a lot less of it, right? And that's what I think markets are.
It's an analogy that I've never heard before. It's very appropriate, but it's another new way of looking at markets.
Yeah, so market returns are always like that. They'll pour out more.
Lumpy, as
they're lumpy.
Market returns are lumpy, just like ketchup out of a bottle.
Yeah. Like we had in the last 6 months. I mean, who would have thought you're going to have nearly 100% return in markets? Now, this is where it gets tricky for us to keep assuming that this is the new way and this is the new return framework, is where it all starts getting risky. And that's why I always believe in a base rate. And that's one of the most powerful concepts of mental models, which is what is the base rate that you would want to get at? And just very simply put, we strongly think at Motilal that corporate earnings are at an inflection point. Corporate earnings for India hasn't grown for the last 5 years. And just to make up the 14-15% long-term average CAGR, we will need to double in the next 3 to 4 years. Right? So if you believe corporate earnings can double in the next 3 to 4 years, you assign a 20p, you get to about 20,000, right? Which is about 12% CAGR for the next 3-4 years. This is the base rate. Now, if you can always...
which, by the way, just to take a small bit, which, by the way, is actually fairly impressive, right? If inflation is at 4 to 5%, you're talking about an 8% equity risk premium. That's nothing to laugh about, right? That's actually a fantastic outcome if that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. The issue is that a lot of people are now getting into the market with expectations of 12% a quarter, right? So that's really my fear. And when
Dogecoin, I don't know how you pronounce it, when that doubles every day, 12% is 12% a quarter.
Yeah, it's
reasonable.
It's reasonable, exactly. And that's where I always say that when you're investing, if you can keep your expectations at the base rate, then you typically end up doing well. If you enter markets saying that I want to make 50% in a year because I did it last year, that's where it gets all wrong, because there will be a year when you may make 0%.
Very, very, very important point actually. What Susmit raises, I think it's rarely that markets disappoint investors. It's investors' expectation that disappoints them. they expect a 20% return or a 25% return, but when they're given a 10 or 11% return, or FD plus 3% or inflation plus 6%, they think they've not done well. While what we now know, or at least what's much easier to see on paper than to live through the journey, is that the power of compounding of that 6-7% extra return over a lifetime is it's outstanding, right? The quality of life you can afford because you're beating inflation by that margin is huge. But I think I 100% agree with that. I think the disappointment is that people's own expectations are not met. Markets do the best that they can. So this brings us to two questions actually. Let's start with the first one. Right? So what's the implication of this return to better? Are there certain kind of sectors, or are there certain styles of investing that are going to do better? One thing that we hear very often, we have also written about it, is that value, which is kind of buying low price stocks in a very simplistic manner. Think of it as buying low PE, low PB stocks. Has not done very well in India in the last 10 years. Right? 2000 to 2010 was a fantastic year to be a fantastic decade to be a value investor, and we have some outstanding investors. And S. Naren was a very big proponent of that investing. What's your view? I think a lot of people are now calling that there's going to be a resurgence in value, and that a lot of growth stocks that have been garnering all the returns will not be the better performer in the next 10 years. How do you contextualize this?
So I wrote about this a few months ago, and I was inspired yet again by Mr. Buffett and Munger in one of their AGMs, and I think they very beautifully put it. They said that there is no difference between value and growth. Right? There's no value without growth. Right. And if you buy growth at obnoxious value, there's no value left.
Right.
So I think that to me is really, and that's so true if you come to think of it, right? If you didn't have steel prices go up, these value stocks would not do well. Right?
Of course.
So I think that's key. And I think what happens in our market is because all of us are so intelligent, and we want to ensure that what we say gets through to investors, is we don't want to say we are buying cheap stocks, right? so we say we want to buy value stocks.
Right.
I really think there's a huge difference between value and cheap. No, if you say that my portfolio consists of cheap stocks, nobody's going to buy your fund.
Right.
So you say the portfolio consists of value
gives
stocks.
That impression that this is going to get repriced.
Yeah.
Cheap is an absolute, value is relative. Value is basically you're saying, hey, this is actually very valuable. I'm just getting it at a massive discount. Right.
Yeah.
And growth in some sense has that opposite connotation, that it's already expensive, but you know what? I truly believe that the company is going to grow into this and even more, which is kind of like, the at least the classical way of thinking about the two.
Right.
And to a large extent, it does make sense. I think if the growth industries or the growth companies don't invest a lot, don't buy a lot of steel, don't buy, a lot of those raw materials, and some of these other prices will not go up. And I mean, our take is that there are certain fundamental differences. I mean, I totally agree. Value stocks eventually, or at least the ones that do grow into growth stocks, or they companies move across these spectrums all the time, right? And which is why one of the other favorite, by the way, factors, at least with our user base, is momentum, right? And everyone thinks about momentum, and everyone is like, oh, you know what? There's momentum, and then there's value, and one of the things, when one of my professors at Chicago, he used to always say that when value stocks are outperforming, you will find them in the momentum basket. Momentum is basically telling you which factor is outperforming.
Absolutely.
Right? Whatever is outperforming at that point in time, quality is outperforming, you'll find that in the momentum. So momentum is not actually a factor. Momentum is just more of like, okay, you look at what is actually performing in the market, and eventually you see, oh, okay, this is already in this basket. So it's an easy way of finding out what's actually outperforming. So
it's very interesting to say that, because I read somewhere that momentum is the sail of the boat, right? It only tells you which wind is blowing, right? Whether it's a value wind. So
exactly.
Momentum cannot be the wind in itself.
momentum cannot be the win in itself. I mean, there is some evidence, that says basically there is a self-fulfilling effect,
Yeah, we
right?
saw that a lot
Yeah,
of that
exactly,
stock.
right. So yeah, so there is some self, but that for that effect to sustain for a very long time is really hard.
Yeah.
But there is a feedback. Some companies tend to do better just because they've done better in the recent past, and market is also a bit forgiving, right? I mean, I'll give you a very kind of a hypothetical example, right? If Apple has 3 bad quarters, it's not going to be sold as massively if Sale has a bad quarter.
Absolutely.
And that's the difference, because it's almost like saying, like in politics, they say you build political goodwill, you also build market goodwill, right? So
Yeah.
some of that actually does play out, right? So the other question, right? The other question about the return to better, where do you see, right? Let me get you spoke a little bit about reforms and a lot of reforms. Where do you see or where do you believe that the Indian investor should focus in the next few years? Where is that this better return going to be coming from? Which are the sectors that will be driving it, or which are the different philosophies that will be driving it?
So one sector that I think will do phenomenally well from an equity market perspective will be real estate.
Okay.
There are so many changes that have happened in the last few years.
How do you play it from a real equity market perspective? Through
you could
REITs,
buy developers, you could buy
like
the whole.
buy Tata Housing and the likes. Okay.
You could buy building material, you could buy housing finance companies. I mean, please remember, real estate contributes to 8 to 10% of India's GDP, right? So it's
Fair
a
enough.
very, very large sector, right? It's the second largest employer in India. So it's a very large sector. But, the interesting thing about emerging markets in general is that you have large sectors, but when there is no regulator, there is no way an organized company can compete with an unorganized player. Right? Because, the black versus white debate, the black will always win if there's no regulator, right? Because there are more shortcuts that you can take and nobody's watching you.
Yep.
Now that you have a regulator, right, which I think is a game changer. And this we've seen across sectors. I mean, we saw it in stock markets. Before SEBI, it was, a different boys' club, so as to call, right? Very few professional stockbrokers came. And once SEBI came in, the whole thing changed. Similarly is RERA, according to me. I think the journey started 2-3 years ago, and Demon, GST, and now COVID is kind of completed the whole chain of the reform that needed to happen. So I think you will see this sector, which was 95% unorganized, right? The largest consumer ticket in India was 95% unorganized, if you were to think about it.
Right.
I think at some point in time over the next 10-15 years, this will get more and more organized. Now, what does unorganized to organized mean? It means that, very simply put, an organized player can charge a premium for the same product. And that is what corporate pricing power is all about, right? So, let's say you walk into a chamber, an area, Chembur in Bombay, and you have, let's say Godrej Properties flat, or you have an Oberoi versus category B, category C developer. Even if category B or category C is at 25% discount, I don't think there are a lot of players now who are shopping discount.
The only, I believe in a lot of this, to be very honest, right? I think the only thing that sometimes I miss out on is where is the immediate catalyst going to come? Because the demand is something that's missing for some time. And I think, see, once that demand comes in, everything you say, it makes so much sense, right? The corporate pricing power and all of that. And I think maybe this is the catalyst, right? Maybe people have more spending power because they're working from home. I don't know how we get there, but how do you think we get to that point where the old inventory gets cleaned out and there is a demand for the new inventory or for newer housing?
Yeah, very interesting. Some of the consumer behavior insights that we've picked up. So there's a huge problem. So the biggest problem of inventory is in central Bombay, right? Very famously documented and spoken about, and some parts of NCR. Now, what has happened in central Bombay?
You just drive around certain parts of Bombay to see it yourself.
Yeah, but you'll be surprised. You talk to developers, the Lodhas of the world or the Oberois of the world, and they tell you that the sales that they've seen in the Central Bombay project in the last 4 months is the highest they have seen ever.
Got it.
Right. So then you go and speak to a few customers who bought, and very interesting. A lot of the families who bought used to live in South Bombay standalone buildings, right? They used to use CCI or the clubs to go and enjoy themselves. Now they can't. Right? So they want these big apartment complexes where the facilities are integrated.
Got it.
Right? Small things like these move consumer behavior.
Right.
Secondly, last 10 years, property prices haven't gone anywhere. Incomes have broadly doubled. Cost of housing loan is down 20% if you look at from a 10-year perspective. So effectively, my purchasing power is up 150%, right? Which is tremendous, right? So if you couldn't afford a 3 BHK in Lower Parel 7 years ago, today you can. Right? So I think, the fact that consumer prices have remained stable, consumer salaries have gone up. You get housing loan at 6.8% now, very close to the lows we saw in 2004. People are seeing the difference between, and somewhere I think it's very similar to, if you remember, this whole office location move that happened in Bombay, right? When you moved from South Bombay to BKC to Lower Parel, right? Nobody thought it will happen in mass. But today, there are really nothing left in South Bombay. I remember when I started working in Bombay 15 years ago, I thought I will die working in Nariman Point, right? Because everything was in Nariman Point. Today, I don't remember the last time I gone for a meeting to Nariman Point. Right? So
that area is
So that similar thing could happen to residential as well.
And do you think is this going to be like a pan-India, is this a pan-India impact you're thinking of, or it's more kind of restricted to metropolitan areas like Bombay?
No, so real estate is always very, very concentrated in any part of the world. So in India, 5 cities make up for 2/3 of the demand.
Right.
So those 5 cities drive everything.
So real estate is one. Where else would you look?
Second is just what is coming out of COVID, right? I think what are the things or the habits that will remain with us, and every crisis leads to some consumer behavior change, right? So post demon, if you saw this whole migration away from real estate into financial instruments, right? That's a behavior that's continued. So out of COVID, I think just immunity, insurance, these things that were put to the back burner, if you would say, from the last 20, 30 years will, I think, come to the fore. Right? We all will be much more careful about our health, where we go to get treated, simple things like which diagnostic lab we go to. I think those are the sectors connected to immunity, which will do very well. And insurance, the fact that mortality came so close, or we were reminded about the fact that we are mortals again, will make us think about insurance away from the tax aspect alone. HDFC Life publishes this survey that they do, and according to them, now the tax proposition is number 9 in terms of consumer preference when buying an insurance.
So return to better. That's the most important thing. Some of the sectors you think people should be focusing on. Real estate, which is of course a pretty big contrarian call, the last decade hasn't been that well. There's not much difference in value and growth. As long as you're buying at a reasonable price, you can get a base rate returns. What else should an investor or a personal finance person be thinking of when they are thinking about their portfolios, when they are thinking about achieving their goals?
I somehow think that the most important thing in personal finance is people should remember that it is more personal than finance. Right? Every individual is different. Your biologic is different. Your chemical is different. You need to be aware of that, right? A lot of investors we have met over the last few years tell us we are long-term investors, but first year minus 10%, and it's no more long-term, right? So unfortunately, I think it is perfectly fine to accept that I cannot take a drawdown on my capital, right? I think if that understanding is there and you can be honest to yourself and to your advisor, right? Sometimes I think the fact that the advisor relationship breaks down is not because the advisor is doing something wrong, because sometimes the advisor doesn't even know whom they're dealing with. right? So I think as long as you can be honest to yourself and to your advisor, the journey becomes much more comfortable.
This is very interesting, actually, study out of Europe, I believe. Uh, so, uh, there is this larger belief that people mostly lie on risk surveys. Everyone is a big risk taker, which is kind of what you were saying, right? Everyone's a big risk taker, 10% down. I'm not investing, the waste of my time. FDs are better.
Yeah.
Right. So that has been established through multiple studies, right? I think Europe and Canada, there's a study that came out which basically said that when people invest and they're talking to an investment, to a professional, to not a portfolio manager, but to a personal finance guide or something like that, then they usually, what happens is that whoever is advising you, whoever is you actually tend to follow their risk allocation rather than your own. So in effect, what it said was that be very sure about who is advising you, because it's very difficult for people to truly empathize and wear multiple hats. So it's very difficult. It might be, I have a certain style of investing. It might be very difficult for me to figure out what someone else's investing style is, and part of the reason why, I mean, we use a lot more quantitative tools to try and figure out what your true risk taking capacity is. There's always debate on how good these tools are, right, and how predictive they are in some sense. But so that's another kind of it's it's personal, but it's also complicated in ways that it's very hard to be able to say very definitely on what will not work, right? I mean, our all the work we have done, right, and all the work we have done in kind of trying to answer this very question, our conclusion is that your stage of life is usually the best predictor of how much risk you take. State of life and how wealthy you are. I mean, simply put, like, if you're married with two kids, you can take less risk than a single person. Age doesn't play a factor. You could be 35 and single, and you can still take a lot more risk than someone who's 26 and who is married with two kids. Wealth, of course, is a big differentiator, because once your needs are met, it's fine, right? Like, I mean, it's almost like saying Elon Musk buying $50 million of BTC. He's not taking risk. He's playing. That's 20 basis points of his wealth.
Yeah, absolutely.
He doesn't
Absolutely.
care.
Yeah.
Everyone else is like, oh my God, that's such a big signal. He's buying so much, but no, he's not buying Bitcoin. He's just having fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anyways, yeah. So that's been our kind of big takeaway on how do we personalize personal finance, so to speak.
No, it's very interesting. I think you're bang on. I never thought of it the way you put it, that age is not a factor, because the old quantitative tools was, if you remember, 100 minus your age is your equity allocation, right? But you are right that a 26-year-old would have much lesser risk appetite than a 35-year-old, depending on how his life has been for the last few years that he's lived.
Whether you have an EMI or not is a much bigger predictor.
Correct. Yeah, not the
Or how much loan you need, because if you have necessary expenses, lifestyle expenses, and a lot of these things go back to how much can someone adjust. A single person can adjust a lot more than someone with family and kids, because kids schooling. There are certain expenses which you think of as necessary expenses. You can't reduce them. While someone else might say, okay, I lost my job, I'll cut my expenses by 1/5 or 1/4 or 1/3. Or I'll go and stay with my parents and I'll literally cut it by, I don't know, 1/10.
Correct.
All I spend on is pizza and Coke. Right? So, right. So it's but that whole idea that it's more personal, and how to kind of plan for it. That's something we also spend a lot of time thinking and kind of building tools to help manage it.
I think what you're doing with quantitative is also interesting, because you can't lie to a robo, right? I mean, the robo is not judging you in a way, or the computer is not judging you. So your propensity to lie is much lower.
But this is where it gets really murky. I'll tell you again, because I'll tell you why, right?
Yeah.
people are actually not lying to the advisor. They
Yeah.
actually lie to themselves. They actually
Themselves.
believe they are outsized risk takers.
Okay.
They actually believe in that perception that's in their mind, right? So it's not like they're saying, "Oh my God, I can't tell an advisor I can't take risk." Oh, of course I can take risk. 100% में डाल दो.
Yeah.
It's
Got
more
it.
about because they genuinely think, oh, because I think the other thing that happens um, it's an ill in the industry, which actually we also don't know what the answer is. But the other thing that happens is what happens when you're beginning to invest, right? You say, okay, past 20 years, for example, you will see data where large cap is 12%, mid cap is 16%, and small cap is 18%. Now, if this is the only data I give you, and I say, where do you want to invest? Of course, you will say small cap. No-brainer, because
Yeah.
I haven't shown you the three paths.
Correct.
I haven't shown you that large cap will fall 40%, but small cap can fall 80%.
Absolutely.
I've only
Absolutely.
given you headline numbers. Then I ask you,
Absolutely.
where do you want to invest? Of course, you will say, oh, no-brainer, yeah, small cap.
Well, why are you even asking me this?
You invest in small cap, and then you're hit with the volatility.
Yeah.
And then you're like, yeah, ये out of syllabus ho gaya.
Yeah.
When I started investing, and it's a very hard question to answer, because you'll tell someone that, yeah, the returns are high, but volatility is higher. Standard deviation is not something that people can,
Yeah.
visualize.
Live
I can't
with.
visualize it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I call small cap investing. It's a title from a book, Potholes to Paradise. Right? You will get to paradise, but there are a lot of potholes, right?
Yeah.
While large cap is more like a smooth ride to heaven, right? So
It's a judge of your character.
Yeah.
So you say you're a small cap investor, we'll see.
Yeah. How much suspension do you have? Yeah.
So, because we used to get asked this question a lot, why don't you recommend small cap? And we said, yeah, it's not like we don't like small cap. So there is any more. It was 2017. Luckily, it turned out 2018 was a very bad year for small cap. So everyone thought it was a great call. But it's like, no, this was purely based on people's behavior. The first time it's down, you're going to come and you're going to be like, so if you know what you're doing, then you're not even going to come and ask us why are you not recommending small caps. You're going to go buy it yourself because you understand exactly what you're going to do, right? And that's the kind of investor who should be in small caps. Anyways, but I think this whole investing thing, it can go on and on and on. But I think the big takeaway for me was return to better. I really like that term. I think if someone asks me, I'm like, there's no new normal, there's only new better. The return to better. Mostly, I think we agree that the reforms have been massive. I think we have to see some of the results of those reforms. Hopefully, we see them sooner rather than later. The idea about base rate is spot on. If you're making inflation plus 6% or inflation plus 8%, you should be extremely happy. And the idea should be to not make 50% in 2 years, but the idea should be to make inflation plus 8 years for 50 years, or 40 years, or the longer the time, the better it is, right? So perfect, yeah. Any parting words for all our investors will be watching this?
I think staying invested is critical, right? Just believe. The funny thing is that compounding is math. It's science. Right? You cannot refute it.
Right.
So that is 50% of the battle. The 50% of the battle is the time you spend, and that is in your control. Right. So if you spend 20 years and you're lucky enough to get 20% CAGR, you are going to make it very, very big. Right? So it's going to be nearly 40 times for your wealth, which is a lot of money. So
exactly.
So if 20% is not in your control, 20 years is in your control. So in an equation,
exactly,
make one a constant.
Great, yeah, great. So stay invested, and return to better will happen. It might take time, but it will definitely happen over the long term. Thanks so much, Susmit, for joining us.
Thank you. It will be my pleasure, Gaurav. Thank you very much.